The observation deck of the Valiant Dawn hummed with the low thrum of deep space engines, a sound that had become as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. She sat hunched over her desk in the corner of the xenobiology lab, stylus dancing across her datapad as she compiled the day's research notes. The chrono on the wall read 0247 hours, late even by her standards, but the work needed finishing. Before the morning briefing, she barely noticed the soft padding of feet behind her. Nico appeared first, his silver fur catching the blue glow of her desk lamp. The Krell cub was small for his species, barely reaching Sarah's knee with oversized ears that twitched at every sound. He dragged something bulky behind him, his tiny claws struggling with the weight. It was the thermal blanket from the crew quarters, soft, oversized, and clearly too much for one cub to handle. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, one eyebrow raised.
"Nico, what are you doing up?"
The cub chirped, a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl, and continued his determined march toward her desk. Behind him, two more cubs emerged from the shadows, Terra and Vex, both slightly larger but equally curious. Their species, the Krell, were apex predators on their homeworld, feared across 3 systems for their hunting prowess and tactical brilliance. But here now they were just children, orphaned by a colony raid and placed under Sarah's care until diplomatic channels could reunite them with their clan. Nico finally reached her desk and dropped the blanket at her feet, panting slightly. He looked up at her with those enormous golden eyes waiting. "You want to sleep here?" Sarah asked softly, another chirp. Tara and Vex padded closer, pressing against Nico's sides. Their body language was unmistakable. They weren't going back to their quarters. Not alone. Not tonight. Sarah sighed, but it wasn't one of frustration. She'd been working with the Krell delegation for 6 months now, long enough to understand their pack dynamics. The cubs had been restless lately, nightmares plaguing them since the attack that had taken their families. The ship's counselor said it was trauma. Sarah called it what it was: 3 terrified children in need of comfort. She set down her stylus. "All right, come here." Nico's ears perked up immediately. Sarah reached down and spread the blanket across the floor beside her desk, creating a makeshift nest. The cubs wasted no time. They tumbled into it, a tangle of fur and tails, positioning themselves as close to her chair as possible. Tara rested her head on Sarah's foot. Vex curled into a tight ball against the desk leg. Nico, the bravest of the 3, sprawled on his back with his paws in the air, already half asleep. Sarah looked down at them, something warm and aching settling in her chest. These weren't just alien creatures under her care. They trusted her. In a universe where humans were still considered soft, weak, unsuited for frontline work, these predator cubs had chosen her for safety. She reached down and adjusted the blanket, tucking it more securely around their small bodies. Nico's tail twitched in contentment. Tara let out a long, rumbling sigh. "All right," Sarah murmured, returning to her datapad. "But I'm still working." The cubs didn't mind. They were already drifting off, the rhythm of her stylus tapping and the soft sound of her breathing lulling them into sleep. Commander Wrath found her like that 2 hours later. The Krell officer stood in the doorway of the lab, his massive frame filling the entrance. He was 7 feet of battle-scarred muscle and military precision, a warrior who had commanded fleets and earned a dozen commendations for valor. His amber eyes swept the room, landing on Sarah at her desk, and the 3 cubs nestled at her feet. For a long moment he said nothing. Sarah noticed him and straightened, suddenly self-conscious. "Commander, they couldn't sleep. I didn't want to disturb." Wrath raised one clawed hand, silencing her. He stepped inside, his heavy boots barely making a sound despite his size. He approached slowly, carefully as if not to wake the sleeping cubs. When he reached the desk, he crouched down, his gaze fixed on the tiny forms wrapped in the blanket. His expression, usually so stoic, so unreadable, softened. "You tucked them in," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, tinged with something Sarah couldn't quite name. Surprise? Respect? "They were cold," Sarah said simply, "and scared." Wrath was silent for another moment. Then he reached out with one massive hand and gently, so gently, brushed his claws across Nico's head. The cub stirred but didn't wake, nuzzling deeper into the blanket. "Our people do not do this," Wrath said, his voice low. "When our young cannot sleep, we teach them to endure, to be strong." To face the darkness alone. He looked up at Sarah and there was something raw in his eyes. But you stay with them. You work through the night so they do not have to be afraid. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. It's not a big deal. They're just kids. It is a very big deal, Sarah. The use of her name, not specialist or human, made her pause. Wrath stood, towering over her once more. The council questions why humans are given custodial duties over our young. They say you are too soft, too emotional, that you will make them weak. He glanced down at the cubs again and something fierce entered his expression. They are fools, Sarah blinked. Sir? Strength is not the absence of fear, specialist. It is the presence of compassion in spite of it. He met her eyes. You do not make them weak. You teach them that safety exists. That kindness is not surrender. That even predators need rest. He straightened to his full height and placed one hand over his chest, the Krell salute of deep respect. Thank you, he said simply. Before Sarah could respond, he turned and left the lab as quietly as he'd arrived. Sarah sat in the silence that followed, staring at the empty doorway. Then she looked down at the cubs, still sleeping, still safe, still trusting her completely. She picked up her stylus and returned to her notes. The valiant dawn continued its journey through the stars, and in a small corner of the xenobiology lab, a human worked through the night while 3 predator cubs dreamed peacefully at her feet. Because that's what humans did. They stayed.